Hello everybody. This lecture is about how to teach science, mathematics, anything from a universal perspective. Now this is just a typical science book. If you go through here, there's chapters on magnetism, solar system, living things, but the chapters are not related. There's no relationship between them. There's no underpinning principle that tells you what's going on. You jump from this into something completely different. It throws the mind. And when children learn like that, they get to be about 18 and then they suddenly start to doubt everything because it doesn't fit together. And there's a good reason it doesn't fit together. And that reason is that we are trying to impose upon the universe human misconceptions, human preconceptions. So let's start again and just say what the universe is doing, and that's very hard for us to do. You state what reality is. Our brains always go with tradition. So everything that's in your head, everything that's taught in universities, you want to go along with that because it gives you a feeling of well-being. That's how societies stay together. So let's teach science just using this principle which we saw in the two previous videos, breaking through the barrier. Everything in the universe happens, comes into existence because of the forces. So if we teach showing how the forces do everything, using them, there's an underlying principle that goes from simple through to complex every time, and you teach like that all the time, simple to complex. I start without any systems or complexities. We generate stars, gravity, and the energy that's released from the strong nuclear force. I need electromagnetism, I need all three. The repulsive force of electromagnetism stops the nucleus of atoms getting too big. So I get stars which generate elements, the next set of complexity, which get released out into space. Gravity pulls them back together, but now I've got all the different masses, and they organize themselves into a clock. Now I need the different masses. Now, what we look at in the book is you get the solar system, and then life over there. But if you can teach two systems together and compare them, the biggest system, the solar system, the smallest system, which must be related to another force. Only two of the forces make systems. The strong, weak nuclear force don't make systems, they just make the nucleus of atoms. But gravity and electromagnetism do make systems. Gravity pulls over a long distance so it can make these big systems. Electromagnetism, it's much stronger than gravity, but because it's positive and negative, it cancels itself out. It doesn't pull over a long distance. Now it's very easy to demonstrate that to children. Just we can show electromagnetism at work, how they can feel it. They can feel it just doesn't pull over a distance. It's all for the things which are happening down there. Now, I'm going to compare the cell, an electromagnetic system, with a gravitational system. Now, something that's written for life. An organism regulates its internal environment to maintain a stable system. But I'm not just going to apply that to the cell or life. That also applies to the solar system. It is a clock. Now, two bodies in space, just Isaac Newton's mathematics, very simple, they just fall around each other or fall together. Three bodies, we call them chaotic and non-linear dynamics. But the solar system is not all chaotic. The chaotic parts, little objects, asteroids, are all kept in rings and belts. kept in the right amount in the right place. And the orbits, I've got cycles. And I've got a gradient, a gravitational gradient. Now if I look inside a cell, I've got an electromagnetic gradient. Lots of gradients and cycles. Now, I've got one force that makes it all operate. The other force is so different it takes no part, but I need it to hold the earth, and I need it for this to exist. I've got one force over here, and another force that's too small to have any effect at this level, but I need it to hold the planets up. It attracts and repels at the same time, makes something out of nothing. So I've got a force. I've got a different force. That's the smallest one. This force has no effect. That's the biggest one. This force has no effect. But I need all the forces for both systems to exist. A force cycles and gradients. A force cycles and gradients. And two laws of conservation. Two laws of conservation. The conservation of linear momentum, the conservation of angular momentum. And if I look inside a cell, just see what's there. Well, I need some energy from sugar to keep the cycles and gradients going. And I need the conservation of electromagnetic charge. There's nothing else there. It's an electromagnetic system. Now, these two laws of conservation and these two laws of conservation make up Noether's principle, the principle on which the whole of physics is based. Now, that's not coincidence, but the biggest system uses two of them, the smaller system uses the other two. This system maintains a stable environment because all the parts behave relative to the other parts. Each part is pulling every other part. And because I've got cycles, I can reduce imbalance between the parts. Every time something goes around in orbit, it'll speed some parts up, slows other parts down until it all balances. Now, some of you will recognize this mathematics. This is the mathematics of Laplace, who comes along after Newton and says, well, you can do the mathematics for this, and you need something that reduces imbalance, two bodies here and a minus sign. I'm reducing imbalance every time there's an orbit. It doesn't disappear, it just gets so small it has no effect. But I get a clock, the biggest clock, cycles, and I get the smallest kind of a clock. Now, my living things here, that's taking on the next step of complexity in the universe. And I need this stability and clock to hold the Earth in a stable environment so that all this can take place. So you can see that teaching like this is completely different. I've got a reason. The universe self-assembles. It self-assembles into ever greater complexity. Now we now teach life as negative entropy. Well, that throws the mind. Negative, as if it shouldn't be happening. It's not the way you should teach. It's like saying that my life, because you know that I'm going to die, is a negative experience. All the wonderful and terrible and interesting things that happen to me while I'm alive, forget that, we'll just go with entropy. I'm going to die at the end of it. And that's common to all of us, so that must be the most important thing. Well, I don't think that is a good way to teach anybody anything. So we're going to stick with just what the universe does. Simple to ever more complex. And as soon as I've got a cell maintaining a stable environment, I'm going to get some change. Now, we know from quantum mechanics that we must have something that introduces change. If everything is classical mechanics, nothing changes. It's all set, it's all certain. But at molecular level, quantum levels, a quantum system, it's not quantum behavior inside the cell. That's just when the quantum entities are not in relationships. There's just the right amount of uncertainty. That's what the system is doing by keeping the chaotic behaviour here in these belts. The whole it doesn't infect the rest of the system all the time and keep dragging it back into chaos. I need change in the right amount in DNA. I mustn't have too much change, otherwise I'm going to get, if I get 2 pluses just in the wrong place, the system, it stops. I can't introduce too much change into living things, otherwise it's going to collapse the system. And they're not only maintaining stability in their internal environment, but they're also balancing themselves in life cycles with their environment. So this is very, very important to teach the children. Where you live shapes your body. Who's the most in balance with their environment is the most successful. So if you're a mammal and you live in the ocean, you have fins. If you're a mammal, you live on the land, you'll have legs. If you're a mammal that lives in the ocean and on the land, you'll have legs that look like fins. Now that seems a very obvious thing to state, stating reality, stating the obvious. But when Charles Darwin first said something like that, nobody believed him. They just looked at reality and said, well, can't see it myself. That's because they can't connect all the other parts. Now when you watch this, there's so many new ideas. Lots of people watch it and then you can remember one sentence, you go away and say, well, I don't get it. You have to watch it again and again and again so that your brain can unstitch what's already in your head. It's all fitted together the wrong way around, or not fitted together at all, as in that book. And then slowly you've got to remember all the components to allow them to stick together. So just keep going with it. The children will outperform any other children who are learning like that, with no reason and no relationship between all the parts. Simple to complex. You must start here. Must. You start at the beginning and you state what the universe is doing. And when you get to life with the cell, you just carry on with a complex. You start with the prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells, cells living in colonies, siphonophores, then plants and animals. There's only 3 kinds of living things that you can see: animals, plants, and fungi. The green things make all the sugar, so you do the same thing with sugars. You show that sugar goes from simple to complex. So I start with 3 simple sugars, which all come from nature. Glucose, sugar number 1, I call it for the children, just easy. Fructose, not the sugar number 1, but galactose. So you show that these will be common to all living organisms. Whatever's there at the beginning will be common to everything. So you look at glucose, and every living cell needs that. That's the energy that's driving that system. Then you just build it up. If I put these 2 together, fructose and glucose, I get sucrose. I get sugar number 2. There's lots of disaccharides, lactose, maltose, the sugar in seeds. Now that only comes when the seed starts to sprout. It stays as a carbohydrate, a complex sugar. It breaks it back down to something simpler. And if you give yeast this in warm water, well, you know, when you're making bread and you give it a complex sugar or flour, it takes hours for the bread to rise. But if you give it that, it takes 10 minutes. And that's great to show the children that's it. There it is, happening right in front of them. And you just keep building up the sugars until you get to sugars like this. Leaves and insect bodies. And you notice they're all the same colour. There's a cicada. Now these 2 sugars are extremely similar. They're almost the same, cellulose and chitin. So that's what you need to be doing, showing with the children. It's all going from simple to complex. And then sugar just makes a little change and changes itself into protein and carries on all the time. It never stops. The universe is relentless in its pursuit of complexity. And before you get to systems, you have to show them the simplicities which are before that. At the beginning, I've just got stars, only stars, nothing else. And then we form galaxies. Well, a galaxy doesn't have these beautiful individual components with all the different masses. So I'm not going to say that's a system, but you might disagree. That's fine. As long as we're getting something somewhere, as long as we've gone through that barrier where we stop just teaching everything separately and saying, well, we can't fit it together. We can fit it together, and we do have enough information. So I'll start to look at things like a virus. A virus does not have this relationship with energy. But you can say, well, it's a system that's complex enough. It does have that relationship with DNA and molecules, but it cannot exist by itself. And this is all about existence. So there's this simplicity here. Now, before I get to the solar system, I've got the Earth and the Moon. Now that's duality, like a binary star. Very, very simple mathematics compared to the solar system. So you compare a virus and the Earth and the Moon. They're in that same simplicity before I get on to the complexities. Magnetism. I don't get the complexities and the subtleties of electric force here, which I need to get the complexities and the subtleties of molecular existence. So we show people magnets. If it was just magnets, we don't take that next step. DNA. It's the next, just waiting to take that next step all the time. And you can hear Marcus de Sauter in a program in our time, Radio 4, prime numbers, saying that prime numbers are they're the atoms of arithmetic. And he's already seen this pattern. Now, if you go back and you see how these numbers fit in with the forces in the previous lectures, you'll see it's exactly the same pattern. We must have numbers, prime numbers, that have uncertainty. You cannot write a formula that tells you the next prime number. And the prime numbers thin out. The composite numbers are made from the primes. Well, if you don't need any more primes, you don't get any more. That's something to think about. And then you can hear him saying again, when we get to this, that the zeros, which lie on the complex number line of the zeta function, they're the DNA of mathematics. He's saying the same thing. Then we get the Riemann landscape over here. So he's already seen this pattern, this simple, and then we go to dualities. Quantum mechanics, the simplicities of quantum entities not in relationships, and they get themselves into molecular structures that they're starting to lose that quantumness. And then they get themselves into a very complex system there. It's all gone. Do it with music and language, that simplicity at the beginning, just a sound, a note. And then you get music, a way of communicating. We all get emotional responses to music. We are full of all the genetic baggage which has gone before us. It's still inside us. All the sounds we make, all the facial expressions that we make, every human being knows what they make. When you become very frustrated, something like that, everybody knows what that is. That's genetic baggage. So you're a living fossil of everything that's gone before. We all get this response to music. Animals use music. It's the simplicity. It's much, much simpler than language. And if you listen to modern jazz, as you start to change music and make it more and more asymmetric, close your eyes and you can hear people starting to talk. That's what they're doing. So it's a very, very interesting way of teaching children anything. How mathematics fits what all this is, why we need it, how it's all going simple to complex all the time. You can show them pictures like that. Patterns denote meaning. And before you get stars, I get these completely irregular shapes. There's no symmetry. It's just whatever. Now, as soon as I get stars forming, I start to get symmetry that denotes meaning. So right at the beginning, I'm separating mathematics out into gravity. Gravity is geometric. I'm separating it out into geometry and arithmetics. Plus 1, minus 1, what? Relationships of electromagnetic force. So I'm just reflecting what the universe is doing all the time in the way that I'm teaching. And there's nothing that doesn't come into teaching like this. So you can show mathematics of a Mandelbrot set. Something which has left and right, head and tail, and generates outside of it all this complexity. Now we saw that pattern right back at the beginning of the universe. You can put this on the computer, let the children watch it going, it generates more and more complexity. Some of it's uncertain, the symmetries are all certain. It becomes more and more and more complex until it cannot support itself anymore, and then it regenerates itself, starts again. Now, something which is very controversial, but I'm just going to state reality, is that that's what the universe does. The universe is mathematical, constants of nature, just where it changes. The Cambrian explosion, you get to a point where the universe just needs to do the same thing again. You get dimensions which come here for the first things, the first stars. I need 3 things for a dimension, but with the Cambrian explosion, we get a body pattern made of 3 pairs of dimension, left and right. I can't have left without right. Head and tail, front and back. And you can't remove any one of those without all 3 of them disappearing. Now that seems a very outrageous thing to say, but I'm just stating reality. And if you mix that with Cambrian explosion, with male and female, ever greater complexity. I go from asexual animals, one possible outcome, to sexual animals, an infinite number of possible outcomes. So then you show the children pictures, all different human faces, all the different snowflakes, they're all the same pattern but all different. Just keep going, keep doing the same thing, simple, complex, anything you can think of. Our behaviour will do exactly the same thing. Now we carry all that genetic baggage. We are the most complex behaviour. But we're also particularly stupid. The First World War. Why? Well, we just behave to a few simple rules. When you get to relativity, it's not just the relative rules of planets and stars. All complexities have a few simple rules that generate complex outcomes. The human brain, 5 laws that govern the human brain. 4 rules that define the city. Now it doesn't matter that the rules are different. The mathematics of nonlinear dynamics produces patterns which are all the same. And there are numbers, Feigenbaum numbers, where these systems will flip over from one thing into another. And the people who work on the systems know that these numbers will go down in history as important as things like the fine structure constant and all the other constants. But we haven't yet realized that relativity is for all the things which behave relative. So a cell just behaves relative to amounts of electromagnetic charge. So this really is a different way of dealing with everything. So you don't teach something like the eye or the heart. You always do it from a simple to complex. So you start back here with something like a lancelet. Looks like a fish, swims like a fish, but no bones. And then sponges here, and then hagfish, the lamprey, human beings, and then the octopus here. So you're not teaching from the human perspective. You don't keep putting humans here. You just go simple to complex all the time. Now we're the most complex. But our behaviour, well, that's sadly lacking in many departments. So what we do, which is different from Neanderthals, very different, is that we compete with ourselves. And because we have an imagination, which shows up in cave paintings, which Neanderthals are not shown, if you put those together, that competitive nature, tool-making ability, and imagination, I get tool-making, which is far better than our social behaviour. That will show up in the history books. So while our tools are good enough to take us to the moon, the same people are using their tools to kill 3 million people in Asia who are no threat to you whatsoever. No. So your social skills compared to your tools, just like in the First World War, are pathetic. But that's what we are doing. We're just tool making for the sake of it. And that goes on around you now. Computers can do more than most people can cope with at the minute. But we just go on and on and on, and we can't stop. There are paradoxes in our behaviour. If you take imagination and put it together with fairness and competitiveness, fairness, the thing that reduces imbalance in groups, imagination and fairness together want revenge. Now that just causes trouble. That just produces emotion here. Emotion just produces more emotion. Actions to distance in the others. It becomes a typhoon. It just generates more of itself. So you can see that paradox is stuck in human behaviour. Now every time you read the newspaper and see somebody's done something terrible, you want the same thing to be done to them. But if you keep behaving like that, we'll just degenerate into a revenge-driven society. So we have courts of law where people sit emotionally outside the problem and try and calm it all down. But you can see what a problem it is now. We've got to this level of complexity. And now, when we're looking in science books like that, our brains always want to go with tradition because that gives us a feeling of well-being, even when we know it's wrong. We want to just keep on going with tradition. But you end up with this nonsense here where we haven't sorted out this very, very simple problem because we keep going with tradition because it just makes us feel good. We all say that, well, must be right. Can't possibly have missed this, but the human brain, that's exactly what it does. It misses the obvious all the time. We've been looking at transitional animals for millennia and not getting it. Staring us right in the face. I have no idea how evolution is done. So we really do need to change, and we need to give children this. When children are learning like this, they outperform all the children around them. So if you're a science teacher or a parent, and you want to make a big improvement, watch this again, again, again. Get in touch. If we talk you through it, you'll pick it up 10 times quicker than if you just sit by yourself. It takes a long, long time for the brain to get all of this. There's an awful lot to think about, there's an awful lot to do. But it's time we did it. So, get in touch with us. We really can help. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye now.